Millionaire mom finds black housekeeper teaching 9 languages to her autistic son, and change everything. Amelia Harrington was only 39, but her name carried weight across Boston's high society. She was the face of a cosmetics empire her grandmother had built, and after inheriting it, Amelia transformed it into a global brand worth hundreds of millions. Her days were filled with charity galas, private luncheons, and photo shoots, each one carefully curated for glossy magazines. To outsiders, she was the picture of elegance, a woman who seemed to have mastered life itself. But inside the sprawling $25 million Harrington estate, Amelia's world was far from perfect. Behind the tall iron gates and manicured gardens was a silence that never seemed to end. The silence of a child who hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. Her son, Ethan, was only 8, but doctors had already written grim predictions in cold, clinical terms: severe autism, nonverbal, unlikely to live independently. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. Each report cut deeper than the last. Amelia had spared no expense. 3 of the top neurologists in the country had examined Ethan, each echoing the same hopeless refrain. There was no cure. There was no path forward. He would always remain locked away, trapped behind invisible walls no one could break. At first, Amelia fought back. She hired private therapists, flew in experts from Europe, and even installed sensory rooms filled with the latest technology. But nothing worked. Every attempt ended in heartbreak. Eventually, the fight drained out of her, and she resigned herself to the silence. For all her millions, Amelia had no power over the one thing that mattered most: her child's voice. The household staff knew this unspoken rule: Ethan was not to be disturbed. Tutors came and went, therapists were ushered in and out, but the boy remained a ghost in his own home, quietly wandering the halls or sitting alone with picture books. Many of the workers avoided him altogether, unsure of how to act. And Amelia herself, though she loved her son fiercely, had begun to accept the doctor's words as truth. Among the staff was Isabella Morera, a quiet black woman in her mid-30s who had joined the household only 4 months earlier. To Amelia, she was simply another pair of hands, responsible for polishing silver, scrubbing marble floors, and blending into the background of the estate. The house was vast, and Amelia rarely noticed her staff unless something went wrong. Isabella did her job well, silently and efficiently, and so Amelia never thought twice about her. But Isabella's presence in the Harrington estate was not as simple as it seemed. Though she now wore a plain gray apron, her story stretched far beyond Boston's elite neighborhoods. She had once been a respected professor, her research cited in universities around the world. But tragedy and circumstance had stripped away her titles, her career, and her pride, leaving her to take whatever work she could find. Still, none of that mattered here. To Amelia, Isabella was just another housekeeper. Life at the Harrington estate followed a strict rhythm. Mornings began with Amelia reviewing business reports over coffee, while Ethan sat quietly at the table, pushing food around his plate. Afternoons were filled with meetings or events, while the staff rotated through chores designed to keep the mansion immaculate. In the evenings, Amelia returned to the same haunting quiet, the kind of silence that money couldn't fill. Yet beneath this carefully maintained order, small moments were beginning to unfold that Amelia never saw. In the corners of the kitchen, in the quiet of the library, or while dusting the ornate shelves of Ethan's room, Isabella had noticed something the doctors had missed. Whenever she whispered words in her native Portuguese, Ethan's eyes seemed to flicker. When she hummed a Spanish lullaby under her breath, his head tilted slightly, as if listening. When she muttered an Italian phrase while folding linens, she caught him staring at her lips. Isabella never spoke of it. She knew her place in this house, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's silence was not emptiness. It was waiting. Meanwhile, Amelia's circle of friends and advisors reinforced her belief that she had done everything possible. "Don't blame yourself," they told her at luncheons. "Some children are simply born this way." She nodded politely, hiding the ache in her chest, convincing herself she was making peace with reality. Still, late at night, she would stand at Ethan's door, watching him sleep, wondering if the boy she had once heard babbling as a toddler was still in there somewhere, trapped beneath layers no one could reach. By the time spring arrived in Boston, Amelia's life seemed to have settled into an uneasy rhythm of wealth and resignation. She was preparing for another charity gala, her hair styled perfectly, her gown tailored to perfection, when she left Ethan at home in the care of her staff. It was an ordinary evening until she returned. What she would see that night would shatter every assumption she had clung to. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come from the experts. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected voices in the most unlikely places. And for Amelia, that discovery was waiting just beyond the polished marble floors of her perfect estate. Amelia returned from the gala later than expected, her heels echoing against the marble as she stepped into the cavernous foyer. The house was unusually quiet, but when she rounded the corner into the library, the sight that greeted her stopped her cold. There on the floor, on her pristine rug, sat Isabella, the housekeeper she barely noticed. Beside her was Ethan, clutching a picture book. But this time something was different. Ethan's lips were moving. For a moment, Amelia thought she had imagined it. But then, clear as day, her son whispered a word. Not English, not even something he had been taught by a therapist. It was French. Amelia's heart thundered. For nearly 3 years, Ethan had remained silent. And now, suddenly, in the presence of a housekeeper, he was speaking? Her shock quickly turned to anger. She demanded to know what was happening, her voice sharp, cutting through the stillness. Isabella stood slowly, her apron smudged with dust, and lowered her gaze. She explained gently that she had noticed Ethan responding to different languages, that sometimes when she spoke Portuguese or Spanish, his eyes lit up, that he had even whispered words back. But Amelia wasn't listening. All she could hear was defiance, intrusion, and an invisible line crossed. Who was this woman to tamper with her son? Who was she to believe she knew more than the finest doctor's money could buy? Amelia's words grew harsh. She accused Isabella of playing dangerous games, of experimenting on a vulnerable child. And though Isabella wanted to speak, wanted to tell her of the years she had spent as a linguistics professor, of the dozens of children she had helped, she swallowed her truth. In this house, wearing this apron, her words held no weight. To Amelia, she was still only the help. That night, Amelia forbade Isabella from ever engaging with Ethan again. The message was clear. Clean the house, stay invisible, and leave her son alone. But what Amelia didn't realize was that the moment had already planted a seed in Ethan. For the first time in years, he had been understood. It didn't end there. Later that week, Dr. Daniel Park, the Harrington family pediatrician, paid a quiet visit. He had overheard Ethan whispering in French during an exam and wanted answers. He sought Isabella in the servants' quarters, away from Amelia's watchful eyes. There, Isabella finally confessed the truth. She revealed her past. The PhD in linguistics, the research, the 19 published papers, and the protocols she had designed for children like Ethan. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not because she lacked conviction, but because she knew how dangerous the truth could be in a world that refused to see her beyond her skin color and uniform. Dr. Park listened, stunned. He believed her. He even promised his support. But he also warned her. If Amelia discovered that Isabella had deceived her by hiding such credentials, the consequences could be devastating. In houses like these, truth didn't always protect you. Sometimes it condemned you. Meanwhile, small victories began to unfold in secret. Ethan whispered greetings in Portuguese. He sang a line of an Arabic lullaby. Isabella hummed while cleaning. He even counted in German, his voice trembling but clear. Dr. Park recorded these moments, convinced that something extraordinary was happening. But the walls of the estate were not as silent as they seemed. Caroline, the senior housekeeper, noticed Isabella staying up late, whispering on the phone. She overheard fragments of conversation: Yale, research, selective mutism protocols. To her, Isabella's secret was leverage. And in a household defined by hierarchy, leverage could mean survival. Without hesitation, Caroline rushed to Amelia. The next morning, Amelia summoned Isabella into her private office. On the desk sat a laptop open to Isabella's academic profile. There it was, proof of her achievements. Lectures, citations, awards. The woman she had dismissed as just another maid was, in fact, someone far more accomplished. To Amelia, this wasn't inspiration. It was betrayal. "You lied to me," she snapped, her voice ice-cold. Isabella stood tall, though her heart pounded. She answered calmly, "I never lied. You simply never asked." But Amelia's fury only grew. In her mind, Isabella had manipulated her son, inserted herself into their lives, and, worst of all, challenged her authority. And beneath Amelia's anger was something darker, unspoken. The discomfort of realizing that a black woman in a gray apron might hold the key that her wealth and privilege could not buy. Before Amelia could say more, the door burst open. Ethan rushed in, his face alight with excitement. And then, in a voice that carried across the marble, he spoke. Not one word, but a sentence. Not in English, but a dazzling mix of Italian, French, and Portuguese. Words flowing together like a melody no one expected him to sing. The room froze. Amelia's eyes widened. Isabella's chest tightened. Dr. Park, standing just outside, stepped in holding recordings, video proof of Ethan counting in German, reciting Mandarin characters, singing in Arabic. The boy who was supposed to be silent had found his voice. And the person who had unlocked it was the one Amelia had tried to silence. For a moment, there was no sound except Amelia's shallow breathing. Then tears welled in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. The truth was undeniable, but admitting it would mean confronting more than just Ethan's breakthrough. It would mean confronting her own prejudice. And as the reality set in, Amelia was left with a choice: to embrace the miracle standing before her, or destroy it out of pride. The Harrington estate was no longer quiet. Whispers had turned into tension, and tension had become open conflict. What began as curiosity about Ethan's progress now spiraled into something far more dangerous for Isabella. Word spread quickly among Amelia's circle. A rumor, planted by Caroline, circulated that the maid was meddling with the boy's condition, using untested methods on a vulnerable child. At luncheons, Amelia was pulled aside by friends who raised their brows and whispered, "You're letting the help experiment on him?" At charity galas, she felt the sting of judgment. A wealthy white mother criticized for letting a black housekeeper play the role of a doctor. The whispers hurt Amelia's pride more than she admitted. And in a world where reputation meant power, pride was everything. The pressure built until one evening Amelia snapped. Isabella was summoned again. This time not to Amelia's office, but to the grand dining room. Its chandeliers blazing, its long polished table set as though for a feast. But there was no feast, only confrontation. Amelia sat at the head of the table, flanked by Caroline and two close advisors. Isabella was ordered to stand at the far end, as though she were on trial. The air was heavy, the silence cruel. Amelia's voice cut through. "Do you know what people are saying? That I let a maid trick me. That I let you pretend you could fix what doctors could not." Her words dripped with anger, but beneath them lay something sharper: fear. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of losing control. Fear of facing the truth that the one she dismissed might actually hold the answer. Isabella tried to explain. She spoke of research, of children who had found their voices, of protocols still cited by Yale and Stanford. But the more she spoke, the colder Amelia's gaze became. "You expect me to believe that?" Amelia said, her tone laced with venom. "You, dressed in an apron, scrubbing my floors, claim to be smarter than the world's finest doctors? Don't insult me." The words hung in the air like a blade. To Amelia, Isabella's greatest offense wasn't dishonesty. It was daring to challenge the hierarchy. Wealth against poverty, white against black, mistress against servant. But just as Amelia's fury threatened to erase everything, a sound pierced the room. It was Ethan. He stepped forward, clutching his book, his small hands trembling. His voice, clearer than it had ever been, rose above the tension. He began to speak, first in Italian, then in French, then in Portuguese. The words flowed out of him, imperfect but alive, weaving a tapestry of sound that filled the cavernous dining room. Everyone froze. Caroline's smugness vanished. Amelia's advisors shifted uncomfortably. Amelia herself stared, wide-eyed, as though the world had tilted. For the first time in years, her son was not silent. He was alive, present, brilliant. And then came the moment no one could have predicted. Ethan turned to Isabella, his eyes shining, and in hesitant but unmistakable English said, "Thank you." The room broke. Amelia's face crumpled, though she fought to hold back her tears. Every denial, every insult, every moment she dismissed Isabella now rang in her ears like a curse. She had nearly destroyed the one person who had given her son back his voice. But just as quickly, pride roared back. Her voice cracked as she said, "This doesn't prove anything. Children mimic sounds. This isn't science. This isn't real." It was desperation, not logic. And everyone in the room knew it. Dr. Park entered quietly, his phone in hand. On its screen were recordings. Ethan counting in German, singing in Arabic, reciting Mandarin letters. Proof undeniable. The boy wasn't mimicking. He was learning, thriving, breaking every limitation placed on him. Amelia's advisors exchanged glances. Caroline shrank back. And for the first time, Isabella felt the balance shift. But the moment of triumph came with a cost. Amelia rose from her chair, her voice trembling between rage and surrender. "Do you know what this means?" she said. "If the world finds out, they'll say I was blind. They'll say I let my son suffer while a maid fixed what millions of dollars could not. They'll laugh at me. They'll humiliate me." Her confession was raw, unpolished, and ugly. It wasn't about Ethan, it was about her. About the image. About control. And there it was, the heart of the injustice. Not just the silence forced on Ethan, but the silence forced on Isabella. A silence demanded by wealth, by race, by pride. The chandeliers flickered above them, shadows stretching across the walls. Isabella stood in those shadows, her breath steady, her eyes unflinching. For years she had been invisible. For years her brilliance had been dismissed. But here, in this gilded prison, her truth had broken through. Ethan's voice had done what no amount of money could. It shattered the walls of prejudice. And as Amelia sank back into her chair, her tears finally spilling, the question loomed in the air. Would she cling to her pride, or finally step aside and let the truth set them free? Because sometimes the most dangerous chains are not the ones that bind a child. They are the ones that bind the heart. The night of the confrontation changed everything. For Amelia, it was the moment she could no longer deny what was in front of her. Her son's voice, his brilliance, his potential, the truth she had resisted, the truth she had buried beneath pride, wealth, and prejudice, was now undeniable. The very next morning, the Harrington estate was different. The silence that had once weighed down its marble halls began to lift. Ethan no longer drifted like a ghost through the rooms. He spoke, he laughed, he sang. And always at his side was Isabella. No longer hidden in shadows, no longer just the maid, but a teacher, a guide, and most of all, the one person who had believed in him when no one else would. It wasn't an easy transformation. Amelia struggled at first. Years of status and power had trained her to see people in categories, who belonged at the table and who did not. But Ethan's progress left her no choice but to confront the truth. Her own arrogance had blinded her, and worse, her own prejudice had almost destroyed the one person capable of saving her son. It was a reckoning she could not ignore. 6 months later, the Harrington estate was alive with voices. Ethan was speaking in 7 languages, flipping effortlessly between English, Portuguese, Italian, and French. Together, he and Isabella launched a small YouTube channel called Voices with Ethan. Within weeks, it exploded. Families from across the globe watched in awe as this boy, once declared hopeless, counted in German, sang in Arabic, and recited Mandarin poems. The channel grew to over 3 million subscribers in just 5 months, but more importantly, it became a lifeline for parents of children like Ethan, who had been told there was no hope. Donations poured in, nearly $800,000 in the first year, funding a foundation Amelia created in Ethan's name to support neurodivergent children. Universities that had once ignored Isabella now begged her to return. Harvard, Oxford, Stanford, all competing for her expertise. Publishers fought over the rights to her book, The Hidden Tongue: How Multilingualism Unlocks the Autistic Mind. But even as the world celebrated her, Isabella never forgot the humiliation she had endured. She remembered the way Amelia had dismissed her, the way her intelligence had been questioned, the way her skin color and apron had made her invisible. She knew her story was not unique. Across the world, brilliant minds were silenced every day, not because of their lack of ability, but because of prejudice, bias, and racism disguised as doubt. And that was the real lesson of the Harrington estate. Not just that Ethan had found his voice, but that Isabella had reclaimed hers. At the American Academy of Pediatrics National Conference, Isabella stood before 6,000 scientists and educators. Ethan walked beside her, holding her hand. She told the truth of what had happened, not just the scientific breakthrough, but the injustice that almost prevented it. The audience listened in silence as Ethan stepped up to the microphone and said, "My name is Ethan Harrington. Doctors once said I would never speak. Today, I speak 10 languages because someone believed in me." The hall erupted in a standing ovation. Amelia, sitting in the front row, wept openly. In that moment, she was no longer the millionaire who had dismissed a housekeeper. She was simply a mother, grateful that her son had been given back to her. 2 years later, the Ethan and Isabella Foundation had changed over 12,000 lives. Children once silenced were now speaking, learning, thriving. And Isabella, once invisible, had become a world-renowned authority on linguistics, her work shaping classrooms and policies across the nation. But perhaps the most profound transformation happened within Amelia. She became an outspoken advocate for inclusive education, using her platform to challenge the same prejudices she had once carried. She admitted her mistakes publicly, how her pride, her wealth, and yes, her racism had blinded her to the truth. It was not easy. It was not comfortable. But it was necessary, because this story was never just about one boy or one woman. It was about what happens when society underestimates people based on their race, their class, or the uniform they wear. It was about how many voices have been silenced, how many breakthroughs have been lost, simply because someone in power refused to listen. Ethan's voice had been unlocked. But how many more children remain unheard? How many Isabellas are still scrubbing floors when they should be teaching, leading, changing the world? The answer to those questions doesn't live in mansions or universities. It lives in us. Whether we choose to see beyond stereotypes, whether we dare to listen to voices that are too often ignored. Because sometimes the greatest revolutions don't happen in courts or governments. They happen in quiet rooms, where one person believes in another and changes the world forever. So I'll leave you with this. If a single black housekeeper could unlock 10 languages in a child the world had written off, What brilliance are we losing every day when we refuse to see people for who they really are? If this story moved you, imagine how many untold voices are still waiting to be heard. Ethan's journey and Isabella's courage remind us that change begins when someone chooses to believe. What part of their story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you want more powerful stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Together, we can keep these voices alive.